Hi guys. Okay, so we're gonna go right into chapter 2. Before I begin that, I just want to go over really quick some basics. So this is week 14, and next week is our last week together as a stop it, my cat. Our last week together as a class that's gonna be lecturing together. And so next week you have your paper 4 due. Paper 4 should be a little bit easier because you only need to write about one thing from 4 chapters. You're only using Cohen, so there's no reason to go looking out for a million other sources to get your information. And you also kind of have an idea where you're leaning towards when it comes to what side you... Get the fuck out of here. I'm sorry, excuse me. My cat's attacking my elbow as I'm talking to you. Yeah, so that, and then also, I mean, everything that I've been kind of having you guys do discussion board wise and paper 3 wise was kind of turning your gears in your head to decide which side you're leaning on. So if you're confused about that still, go review the PowerPoint slide and the video. I don't do those videos for myself because I like doing this. I do them for you guys, and I could tell on your papers when you don't watch those videos, when people are consistently doing the things that I said not to do. Other than those few, just want to let you guys know, even though I'm still grading papers, a lot of people have improved so much, and it's kind of my goal of why I'm so OCD sometimes, because I remember that one professor in college that, you know, she was really strict on how she wanted us to do our writing, and that has improved my writing that improved my writing from college there on and for grad school. So I hope in some way, I could tell with, I don't know if you're continuing in other classes, but a lot of you guys improved a lot already. But anyway, so paper 4 is due next week. And then for week 15, you have all your discussion board posts. Will be the discussion board post that is due on Wednesday, May 6th, is your last mandatory discussion board post. Discussion board post number 15, which is due on week 15, is extra credit. So if you are like all caught up with your discussion board post, you don't have to do it. I suggest you do it just for the free extra points. And then all your extra credit for the 4 writing assignments are due at 12 o'clock p.m. next Wednesday. You know what I mean. 11:59 p.m. next Wednesday, the last day of class. I will not take late extra credit assignments. I have to grade a lot of things, and that's just extra stuff that I have to do. Submit them on the due date, along with your final paper. And then I'll take late papers with you getting penalized, but extra credits are due when they're due. So, and then also all your YouTube comments are due, right? So we're doing this as if, I've canceled class on Mondays, right? That's your free hour and 15 minutes that was scheduled for this class. You will otherwise be at John Dray for you to do the extra work that I have you do, which is just YouTube comments. You would still be doing discussion board posts and writing assignments if we were still at John Jay. But other than that, the YouTube comments are the only extra thing that I have you guys doing. And I think that's fair for, me canceling class on Mondays, right? So it's like as if Wednesday is our day for you to come in at 6 o'clock, watch this video, and then participate in your comments, right? So I still gave you guys a week to do that, but all those comments are due next week. I told you guys a few weeks ago, do not wait for the last minute to comment 6 40-minute YouTube videos. I can read through the bullshit, and if you waited and just give me some bullcrap comments, it's gonna affect your participation grade. That's just the way it is. If you didn't really participate in class and your comments or you're not commenting, you're gonna get between a 70 to 75 for participation. So that's that. And then you commented frequently and you talk in class, and depending on your comments and all that, you range between 85 to 100. So just letting you know about that. And then of course, whatever you get, extra credit wise, maybe you're one of those students who just was like, screw these YouTube comments, and I don't like participating in class, but you did all the discussion board posts and you did amazing on your writing assignments and you did all the extra credit, then 20 points of extra credit could go to your participation grade. You guys get what I'm saying? So I mean, it's just, I get it. It's rough time, but it's the last week. It's time, crunch time, the same way it would be crunch time if we were at John Jay. So next Wednesday is our last class. Next Wednesday, I will post a review video for the final and a video lecturing on the last chapter, but comments will not be mandatory for that video. It will be a video for you just to kind of get my little goodbye to you guys. It'll be the last time I'm gonna be on camera talking to you. I'm gonna do a little summary of everything, review for the final, and like goodbye, good luck on your exam, and that's it. So this is your last video where comments are mandatory, okay? All right, so any other things? So extra credit is due next week. Paper 4 is due next week. Today, which is today technically May 6th, you will have an optional quiz, which was due at 6 o'clock. So that quiz was basically free points. I said, just do it, right? It doesn't matter if you lost, if you got 10 questions wrong. That was, I don't even know how many was on there, but you guys know what I mean. If you got 2 questions right, you got 2 points, right? It was extra credit. I don't see why you wouldn't do that. But no, there will be no makeups. A video is going up with me going over all those answers. I cannot give you credit. I might as well just give you a free 12 points now for something where all the answers are going to be up. Not doing it. And then that's it. Then the review slides are there for you. They are PowerPoint slides that are available for you to edit and move and make outlines and do whatever you want to do. Quiz yourself. Combine everything in one. It's there for you to do what you want. So if anyone doesn't have Microsoft or has a problem accessing them, let me know, because this is, very important for you to study for your final. Once the final exam is done on my end, I will then give you a filtered version of all those questions, just so you can kind of limit your studying to what's on the final. So that's that. So I think that's it. So we're pretty much, you just finally read your last mandatory chapter, which is chapter 12 on violence, and then chapter 13 is like, read it. But I know there's a lot going on, so I'm just gonna do a lecture on it, and I'll make your comments mandatory, and your discussion board post based on that chapter is also optional, but it's extra credit. All right. So that's the house cleaning stuff. So let's go over the chapter. So I am opening the PowerPoint slide, which is underneath week 14 and chapter 12, family violence and abuse. So a little bit of a warning, this chapter could be kind of triggering for anyone who's experienced any kind of violence or abuse in their lives. So I'm hot, but so I hope that when you guys read it, if it does relate to your life in any way, just it didn't affect you negatively, especially in this time period of us having, anxiety and being stuck at home. But furthermore, let's start with the first slide. So the chapter starts with discussing Bernadette Powell. The chapters always usually start discussing some kind of real life example. And the whole book does basically, but so this African American woman in her 20s, and someone's trying to FaceTime me. An African American woman in her 20s, and she killed her husband, who's been abusing her for several years. She was prosecuted by an all-white male jury, sent to prison. So there's so many factors, and specifically when we get into the discussion of intersectionality that this relates to. But if you're going to kind of take a case that's going to summarize everything we've learned about in this book, this could kind of be a good one, because we get into family, not only family and abuse, but also class and race and the power struggles between men and women and the role of society, right? There's so many things. Like if you had to pick a topic to write about, right? If I did one of my papers, use all the chapters in the book and write a real life example that relates to them, this case could probably be that. But unfortunately, this is one of those sadder stories where, a woman's defending herself against an abusive, husband, and she was sentenced to prison. So we're going to get into the differences with that kind of domestic violence, because domestic violence and abuse is basically any type of abuse that is involving family members, but there are different levels, right? So technically what she did was domestic violence, but it was in defense, right, of herself. So we'll get into all that. So let's go move on to slide 2. So I itemized for you guys the different parts of the chapter, that the different sections of the chapter and what the book Cohen discusses. We will kind of slide past the parts of 1 through 6, and I do want to focus more on parts 7 through 9, consequences, feminist perspectives, and interventions. Mostly because a lot of the, child abuse, elder abuse, sexual violence, etc., it's all very important, but it's a lot of definitions and statistics, which is important in a sociological study, but I want to focus more on like the sociological aspect of what are the consequences of all this, right? So not so much the data, but the actual results of analyzing this data and the feminist perspectives of it and the interventions and whether or not they work, and get your opinions on that. So it's basically what I have you guys doing for your paper. And that's why, even though I said everybody's doing really good so far, there are the few that are doing what is obvious to me, which is like picking out a definition, just like one word, defining it, and then giving me like a paragraph or 2 paragraphs of like what you think. And that's that's good in some aspects, but specifically for a sociological paper, you want to use all that data to reach some kind of conclusion that relates to what I'm asking you, right? So I have you saying for the next paper, is a family a haven or a outdated institution? So you would use, like, let's say you're going to focus on family violence, you would, if you're going to say that it's a outdated institution that perpetuates inequality and specifically focus on violence against women and domestic marriage, right? You would use the data that's related to intimate partner violence in this chapter, and perhaps some sexual violence. And right, you'll give the numbers like, well, this is an example as to why marriages can be deadly, violent, dangerous for women. And then your kind of sociological analysis of that would be kind of what's discussed in the parts of the chapter of the feminist perspectives, right? So not just because the woman is stuck in the house with the male, but more in depth of, society being male dominated, and we live in a patriarchal system that protects the man, even in instances of reporting a crime, right? The woman's word is often not taken for truth, right? We have to constantly prove when it comes to rape, proving that what she's saying is true. So this is an example, right, of why the family can be an outdated institution that perpetuates larger inequalities, right? So it's not just enough to use the definition of something as, okay, I'm pulling this from Cohen. You also have to pull the stats and pull the thoughts that are coming from him to further support your overall argument. So whatever, I just went into a little bit of a tangent, but I'm just kind of want to show you guys how to do that a little bit better with this chapter. If you choose to write about this chapter, this is a great chapter to use for both the haven and the outdated institution argument. All right, so moving on to slide 3. Like I said, I'm going to kind of go by these slides really fast that involve definitions, and then and whatever I go past, I will leave the notes there for you for your personal reading. All right, so an institutional perspective, what is family violence? So family members against other family members. There could be indirect and direct violence, right? So like this difference of abuse and negligence. I can hit my daughter, God forbid, saying that out loud, but I can hit my daughter, or I can just neglect her and not feed her. The difference between violence and abuse, kind of similar to what I just said. Secrecy and isolation is how it usually happens. And, people usually feel like they're alone, especially if you're a child and that's all you know. And, right, because everything we've learned about in this class is that we are socialized and we're taught what's normal by our family. So if you are a child who's born into a family that all you know is abuse and violence, that can be considered normal to you, right? You don't know that you're not supposed to be getting spanked, right? And then, but also what's sad about that is with violence is that a lot of times it's a cycle, right? So the same way that child doesn't know you're not supposed to do this, it's not normal, they will then grow up and produce the same most likely to produce the same violence, right? It could be these two extremes of I would never treat my child like that, or you reproduce the violence or abuse that you were a victim of. And that's why we kind of get into this debate of whether or not do you think that the state should get involved. Why am I slouched? All right. And then individual and systemic. So that's similar to what I was just saying, right? Is it something that's a responsibility of the individual to take care of, or should society or institutional systems get involved? So that's that. Let me see. And so all this, I like the way this is discussed on page 439. If you want to write about this for your paper, this is a good page to refer to, specifically when they're talking about whether or not, I like when he talks about how this relates 100% to what your paper 3 was supposed to be. It can also relate to paper 4, because Cohen is saying, for some reason, we consider what is normal as what is positive, right? So when you say, oh, well, that's a normal family, you automatically assume that when you're saying that's a normal family, that means that there's no abuse, there's no there's no cheating, there's everything's positive. Our idea of what is normal or what is positive usually equates with what we assume is normal. However, Cohen is saying that family violence is actually very normal. It happens a lot. So is rape. But for some reason we don't consider that as normal. Do you guys get what I'm saying? And it kind of relates to what I wanted you to do for your paper 2. Paper 3, which was when I said write about something positive to family, but also let me know what you're considering as positive, because what you might think is positive isn't positive to others. And they also explain that in this part of the chapter, again, 439, when he says that what you might consider normal is related to something positive, but it's also different from the point of view. So you being abused, it's not positive for the person, for the victim, and the family is not acting normal to you. The family could still be acting normal to you, versus the abuser who thinks the family is functioning normal and is positive to them. You guys get what I'm saying? So I'll kind of, just to put a little bit of question in this part, because I haven't asked one, and I'll write down for myself around 16 minutes. Do you have a further example of this, or the difference between, do you understand what I'm saying when I'm saying the difference between normal versus positive, right? So just kind of your idea on that. Is that something that you agree with? Is there another example that other than what I just gave, that understand this idea of what's normal isn't always necessarily positive? And sometimes family abuse, well, not sometimes, a family that is involving abuse is actually pretty normal, unfortunately, especially in America. And also this page is important to understand and read. And it's the very first 2 pages of the chapter, about how the arenas all overlap with each other and relate, and kind of can either add to the problem of violence or help the problem of violence. So this is kind of a little bit of a teaser into that, and we'll get into it. But this is a very important page. I suggest you to go back and read this. All right, so 17 minutes and I'm on slide 4. Okay, let's keep it going. All right, so these are the 2 differences between intimacy and care relationship, basically just showing different types of relationship. Intimacy, you kind of relate more to a couple who's in some kind of sexual or love, a relationship, like your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. And then of course care is more where you're in the responsibility care for somebody else. So I care for my child, I care for my elderly parent, etc. So the one main thing to know about these relationships is that there is some form of dependence, right? So you're depending on somebody, whether it's because they're caring for you or because there's some kind of emotional bond with them. And a lot of times this is what attributes to the family. So I'll just kind of ask here about, how do you think dependence can lead to violence, even though it's kind of explained in this chapter? But dependence and the consequences of leaving somebody, right? How does that relate to violence in the long run? All right, so moving on to slide 5, we are listing the different people who face the victims of violence, right? So intimate partners, children, and elders. And moving on to slide 6. So this is just a little bit more of a specific definition. I think we kind of know these. I don't really need to get into it too much. Moving on to slide 7, the definition of child abuse and neglect. This is the federal government's definition of child abuse and neglect. This can be a range of behaviors, deliberate acts, or failure to take care or provide for a child, right? And this is Cohen notes this is a systemic feature of American families. So what he means by it's a systemic feature of American families is that a lot of the time, specifically, not even specifically, we're dealing with both physical harm and neglect. other systems come into play with this, and a perfect example, which I put later on the slide, is the Gabriel Fernandez. Let me know if anybody below has seen that, right? So with Gabriel Fernandez, it wasn't just his mom, was his mom and her boyfriend were that I couldn't even finish that, by the way. But anyway, number one, let me know if you've seen it. Let me know your opinion on it and relate to the chapter in your own words. But yeah, so the mom was abusive, the husband was abusive, the boyfriend was abusive, and then they were coming from this long line, the parents, of abuse themselves. The father was out because he was in prison, I believe, right? And then the social services were completely neglectful of him. The teachers were always too late. Like, so it's just a good example of the systemic feature of abuse in American families. So there's not just, it doesn't only take, right? They say take a village to raise a child. It's not only just a failure of the parents. And that's why the social workers were later on attempted to be prosecuted. And I didn't finish the video because it was so traumatizing. So if you guys want to watch it on my like suggestion right now, just beware. It's very triggering. But yeah, so just me kind of saying this is an example about how it's a system, right? It's not just one specific arena, which is the family, right? The state and the market will have a lot to do with it as well, right? And it could be both positive or negative. So similar to what you guys read about paper 3, and this also could be translated to outdated institution or haven. All right. So for example, like the Gabriel Fernandez example is a perfect example of like this outdated institution perpetuating harm, right, on a child. But there was a part of his life that he had a little bit of a haven involving the gay parents, remember? I think they tried to say that they were like he possibly could have been abused, but I don't know, depending on your point of view on that, if it was true. It looked like it was some kind of lie they were trying to create so he wasn't with gay men. But I don't know, what do you guys think about that? Let me know your opinions. But that's kind of an example of that for a short time, the family was serving as a haven for him, right? However, unfortunately, because of society or people who were in his life's negative point of view about being gay, right? Because they thought because his parents were gay, he was going to be gay. He eventually led into this. So this is like, that's like a perfect example of like this outdated institution, right? People had this idea of what a family should be, of a mom and a dad. But look what happened to him with the mom and the dad, versus they didn't want him with the gay men. But then look, you know what I mean? So I'd like to hear your opinions on that. All right, so here's some patterns of abuse and neglect. I'm on slide 9, those who live with their parents. All right, so this is people who are most likely to get and experience child abuse. Those who live with parents who have their own mental health problems, those in households where domestic violence occurs between the adults, those in poor families or poor neighborhoods, and those with weak support networks. So research indicates that 12.5% of children suffer maltreatment in some time during childhood. So this is important because it relates to a lot more things that we've spoken about. So if you go back and remember in our class chapter, who was more likely to be in an impoverished neighborhood or be poor? In just our gender chapter, who was most likely to be abused? Right? Who has when there's some kind of power dynamic, who's usually the one in power? The man, right? And then who's also, we never really got into mental health, but right, not only just who's most likely to have mental health, because I do not know that statistic off the top of my head, but I do know that mental health resources are usually more available to wealthier individuals, which usually includes, right, white families, rich, versus people who, more in poverty, colored children who might be having mental health, but instead of getting the treatment that they need, it is seen as some kind of behavioral issue, like in school, and they'll be punished instead of treated. So just think about how all these things that we've spoken about in the past relate to patterns of abuse and neglect. All right, so moving forward to slide 9. Child abuse and neglect, and this is just a chapter that is a chart that is showing the percentage of reported child abuse and neglect by the perpetuated relationship. So this is what was on your quiz, and it was the mother. So the mother and father count for about 80%, but the mother is the one who has the higher percentage of abuse. So why do you guys think that's the case? Besides what's explained in the chapter, because this says right here that a high percentage of single parent families are headed by the mom. But what do you guys think? Also think about, we've already learned about who's most likely to be a single mom, right? So again, this is where we talk about race and class. And also, as we'll see in these chapter, who is more likely to be in abusive families? Unfortunately, people, certain racial groups, right? So just think about how all of this relates, and this thinking about all this will help you like write better papers and make better connections, right? So just kind of think about all that stuff. All right, moving on to slide 10. This is another chapter specifically part of the chapter involving elder abuse. I mean, just to really quickly list all the reasons why this is has been a slight increase is that of the aging baby boom generation and increasing life expectancy, right? So we're living older, so there's more elderly people, so people are just, there's more statistics of that. However, it's still more likely for people between the ages of 18 to 24 to 5 times more likely to be the victim of a violent crime. It is, but the problem that is with this, and you kind of see this now with COVID, specifically with the nursing homes, is that elder abuse is extremely difficult to identify and prevent. Elderly people are probably most likely being, if they're being abused, it's probably some person who is caring for them, right? So it's hard for somebody, dissimilar with women with their husband, to speak up and report something that's happening when you're in the care of that person and your literal livelihood depends on their ability to stay in your life economically and physically. So let me see, anything else here? No, I'll leave the notes on this for you guys, just so you have. Oh yeah, so the thing I want to point out was the difference between coercive control and expressive aggression, where the coercive control involves threats, keeping the elders from leaving the home, controlling the money without consent. So it's not necessarily just the physical abuse, right? It's this abuse that is more, less tangible and just more, right, like threatening them, but not so much physical, versus the expressive aggression where you're acting angry or feels dangerous and severely insulting or humiliating them. So that's just the difference between those two that I decided to point out. And then we have intimate partner violence, which is, this is a chart that is showing the lifetime occurrence of intimate partner violence for adult men and women. So the reason I put up, and of course, as we'll see here, that is more likely for women. The reason I put these terms up of domestic violence, violence against women, and intimate partner violence is that the difference between the three is not, right? It's just the difference is who decides to use the term. So domestic violence used to be a term to refer to any violence that's happening between families, and then violence against women is a term that is more coined by feminists, which is referring to domestic partner violence committed specifically with men against women, right? Because not just, that's the difference with the domestic violence, because it can include women against men, versus the violence against women, which is just men against women. And then intimate partner violence is just the Cohen definition. That's what he chooses to use, and it's also used by the federal government in their data collections, right? So it's back to that definition of intimacy that I gave you guys before. So these are just different terms, and take this into account when you're writing your paper 4. If you choose to write about this, make sure you're choosing the correct term that you are choosing, that you're writing about, right? All right. And there's a bunch of statistics here. I'll leave it up for you guys. All right, so we are on slide 14. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm reading the slide. I'm on slide 12. Partner violent crime was not reported. So this is showing the reporting, and I don't want to get into too much, but I feel like we know a lot of reasons, whether it's from your personal life or just from TV, of why women don't report domestic violence. But I'll just have you guys at 28 minutes ask this question of why don't women report? Why is domestic violence usually not reported, whether it's women against men, men against women, violence? Where are you going?
I have to run to the store.
Okay, nothing. I'm recording. It's just I'm with her, and then she needs a million things while I'm doing this. Okay, it's fine. Let me still record. I'm almost done. All right. So sorry, excuse me. So why intimate partner violence crime was not reported? So these are different reasons. So is there any other reason here that you guys feel like is missing, and so forth? I'll just leave these notes up here for you guys. It's all right. So I am on slide 13. the context of violence. I'll leave this here for you guys as well with the notes. This is basically just a framework that was created about how this violence occur between couples. So we have common couple violence, which is the more common, which is basically from specific arguments. It's not necessarily from a pattern of escalating violence over time. So kind of what you just saw, which is, but not abuse, but like, you have an argument and then it'll lead to some kind of spontaneous violent act, versus intimate terrorism, which is the really kind of abusive relationship like you see like in J-Lo Enough, where involves psychological abuse, escalating violence continuously, right? So think of just more like that. And then you have the violent resistance relates to the Bernadette Powell story, where you're resisting the violence that you're a victim of, and it's some kind of self-defense. So I will leave these definitions up there for you, but this is just the 3 different categories that Cohen lists here. This is a chart regarding intimate partner homicides, and I will leave the stats there for you to review as well. And then here is slide 15 about who is at greatest risk. So women. So women are at much greater risk of rape and violence that occurs as serious injury. Women and families that experience economic hardship, and relationships that involve drug, alcohol abuse. So these are the clearest findings of research that have been done in the past. But yeah, so like when couples were less economically secure, there's more likely to be some kind of violence. So remember from the other chapters, when people are less economically secure, they're more likely to get a divorce. And then also we'll learn later that when a woman eventually wants to leave her husband, that's more likely when she'll be at threat to be killed. So there's, again, think about how all of these relate to each other. Race, class, so forth. Moving on to slide 16, women in cohabiting relationships. Boom. All right, cohabitation, there's the word. Women in cohabiting relationships are more likely to experience violence than those who are married. That's, relates to so many chapters that we've read about. There's a specific chapter with cohabitation. But yeah, so think about that. How does it relate to everything else that we've learned about? And then for serious violence, women, what time is it? Face higher risk shortly after they've left their abusers. So there you go. Trav! All right, sorry, never mind. All right, so let's go to slide 17. There are differences between racial and ethnic groups. All right, so here's another example as to the differences between individuals, specifically involving race. So just think back to our chapter 3 with race and families and historical inequalities and so forth that, African American and American Indian and Hispanic people already dealt with. And now look at these statistics involving race. But also take into account, reporting and counting and data and stats. With everything with sociology, you always got to second think, okay, but where's this data coming from? How? Especially with crime victimization surveys. Because a lot of times people won't report that they've been a victim of a crime, even if it's confidential. But other than that, these are the numbers. And unfortunately, American Indians are very high and blacks. So let's really quick. Violence is more common among American Indians and African Americans than amongst whites and Asians. But remember the thing about Asian families, right? They're very secretive. I'm not saying that they're 100% are higher or more abusive than others. I'm just saying keep these things in mind. So Asian Americans are lower than most general generation. All right, so this is sexual violence. These are just different definitions. I feel like you guys know what these are, but I will leave them in the notes for you. Don't want to get too much into it. We kind of went through this with the sexuality and the risks that we get in that come with that, right? With the hooking up and all that stuff. But that's there for you, all these definitions. If there's one thing I want you to get out of this is that the U.S. legal system has very specific definitions for this, which is specifically rape, which involves penetration. So think about that in context of sexual harassment or assault when it comes to men. That's basically, this idea of you having to be penetrated, and about whether or not a man can be raped. So, what do you guys think about that? I'll ask that around 34 minutes. Can a man be raped? What do you think? Also, this idea of marital rape. That's one thing I want to focus on. I have a star next to it. The issue of consent. And this is a good topic to write about for the Haven and the Haven and outdated institution argument of how rape within marriage used to not even be a thing. Before the 1970s, most cases of marital rape were not considered rape. Married women were governed under the legal standard of coverture. So you guys remember that thing from chapter 2. And women had no legal protection, right? It was considered that you marrying a man, could you imagine this? You marrying a man was basically consent for you to have sex whenever he wanted. Insane. And that technically they said that a man couldn't rape his wife. So what do you guys think about that? So, the chapter gets into how this reinforced the traditional idea of marriage, further reinforces, male-dominated society, further abuses women, and there's still religious and cultures that believe this. So what do you guys think about that? And it says convictions are still hard to obtain because it's very hard to prove that. It can be hard to prove that a husband raped a wife, specifically depending on the society and culture, country, etc. that they're in. Specific religions, right? Anybody have any kind of examples they want to share? What do you guys think about that? Can a husband rape his wife? All right, so here is a chart about how common is rape. I will skip this, but leave the notes there for you to review on your own. Women's relationship to the perpetrator of the cases of rape. Basically, rape is more prevalent in families and relationships than it is among strangers. And that's why, not even to get to the whole immigration chapter, this is true for like violent crimes in general, that you are most likely to be abused, raped, etc. by someone within your own racial group, by someone in your own family, personal group. And, we have people, people who are like against immigration, etc. This idea, like, yes, specific groups, not specific groups, yes, people are raped by different demographics all the time, right? Unfortunately, women are raped by immigrants and, different races, etc., right? This idea, have you guys ever seen The 13th or I Am Not Your Negro? Such good documentaries, and they talk about how this idea of black men raping white women is like embedded in our cultural society. Meanwhile, historically, it was always white men who raped black slaves and reproduced children with them. However, for so long, it was this cultural idea of black men wanting white women, and and it's very hard to kind of remove these cultural ideas that are in people's heads. So I just want to, meanwhile, rape is much more prevalent within the family. However, when you say that's, think about the Menendez case, I don't know whoever believes the boys, but it will probably be more likely to be believed today than it was back then. Like, people could not fathom the idea that this father was raping his sons. So just something to play with in your head. What do you guys think about that? Opinions, thoughts about the whole cultural idea of one race always wanting to rape the other, etc. All right, going down to slide, I don't know what I just did. Okay, going down to slide 21. All right, so unfortunately, like the rest of the book, I'm going to start going a little bit fast. A lot of data is not available on lesbian and gay relationships. Cheers, like we're in class. Violence in gay relationships. This, how long have I been teaching this? I don't know how long I've been teaching this class, but I want to, hopefully by the next time I teach this class, there's a more updated book. Because I don't think the Me Too movement's even discussed in this book. The date of publication goes back and forth between 2015, 2018, I think. But he always says not data on lesbian gay relationships. And so a lot of times, a lot of the stats that we're reading is based on heterosexual couples. So it's something to keep in mind. However, the problem with same-sex violence and abuse also can occur in homosexual couples. Lesbian and straight women are more likely to experience violence than gay or straight men. Isn't that interesting? Why do you guys think that? I'm going to ask you guys this at 39 minutes. Why do you think that lesbian women are more likely, are similar to straight women, are still more likely to experience violence? Because it's interesting because when it's a heterosexual relationship, it is the man who's most likely to be violent against the woman. So it's interesting that when it's a lesbian, there's still more. I'm thinking maybe because gay men are less likely to report. This is me thinking like out loud with you guys, right? What? That's so interesting to me. Right? These are things that more studies have to be done, right? This is like going to PhD, right? Like a thesis you want to go, write about. I think that's really interesting. But and then a declining violence. So this is kind of the positive side of the chapter. Family violence has decreased. So we have all these reasons we have increased shelters, hotlines, a lot more services than it used to be, right? So unfortunately for women like Bernadette Powell in like the 70s, there wasn't a lot for them to go out and seek for help. And now not only that, but now women have more independence, right? So we saw before that because you're more economically in a situation that you're able to go out and leave your husband, your abuser, if he is an abuser. And then of course there's declining marriage rate. So the fact that people are getting married less just kind of takes away the situation as a whole, therefore decreasing somebody in the situation to be victim of domestic violence in the first place. And then the last part of the chapter I kind of skipped and put it here was the discussion about modernity, which is, remember we spoke about this theory about increased individualism and parents treating their children more emotional, just everything that relates to modern society, just overall, like we're more progressive, just relates to this. And I'll leave the notes on this as well for you guys. All right, so consequences of family violence. As I say, I really want to get to the main parts of it, and I spent 40 minutes on the others. But all right, so consequences of family violence. I mean, I'm not going to read off on the slide here, but the main thing that I want you guys to get from this is that despite the declines of family violence is still extremely pervasive. And not only that, but the consequences are still extremely deadly, right? It's not just the fact of continuing abuse, but people actually dying from it, right? And it's repeated, right? Because with your family, it's not like you're in an aisle, a dirty aisle. What am I saying? Aisle, whatever, alley. And somebody jumps out and rapes you and it's like a one and done, even though it's just as horrible. But, you're living with someone who's in your close circle, you repeatedly see them over and over again. The effects of abuse can be first observed through individuals' behavior, right? So the signs of what's wrong, why isn't he eating? They're peeing the bed, things like that. And then it could also affect your future intimate relationship. So maybe you'll become abusive, right? So if you're a victim of abuse, maybe you'll become an abuser or be more likely to accept more abuse in your life. Higher risk of risky sexual behavior, right? The value and purpose of sex is misunderstood to you. And you're less likely to have a healthy, long-lasting relationship. So think about this in terms of the other stats that we read. Single moms, more likely to be abused. Cohabiting moms, more likely to be abused. Think about this in relation to what I just said. Less likely to establish healthy, long-lasting relationships, right? This is all related to each other. Risky sexual behavior, having multiple children, right? Sexual abuse survivors are less likely to marry and more likely to cohabitate there. And however, women are more likely to end abusive relationships now than in the past. So there's some good news there. Because of the increasing acceptance of divorce, right? All right. So, this is a good quote because this relates 100% to your paper. Families are a source of pain and suffering, but also a source of strength and resilience. Boom. Paper 4, right there. Families are a source of pain and suffering, but also a source of strength and resilience. So that is, that's why this is a good chapter for your paper 4, if you choose to write about this, because it shows you both sides. All right, so I put the slide on slide 29, Gabriel Fernandez, I brought it up. So it's just, again, watch at your own risk. All right, so I kind of went over this in the last PowerPoint for your review of your quiz. But discussion board posts, I had you guys answer this question. The answer is on page 466. This is one of my specific discussion board posts where if you did the reading, you found it. But yeah, he blatantly says from chapter 11, the work shifted from the family to the market. And now in chapter 12, we're going to discuss how handling violence has shifted from the family to the state. So that's why I only wanted a 50-word minimum, because that's like literally all you had to write. Very easy, very simple. So how is it possible that violence and abuse are so prevalent in the institution of the family when the family unit is so glorified and respected? Why is there so much systemic suffering? So these are thoughts that that we're supposed to be thinking about as we're doing this reading. And from the feminist perspectives, they discuss it as male domination and intersectionality. I feel like I don't need to get too much into it because I feel like you guys already kind of know what they're saying. It is very reflective of what we saw in the conflict perspective and chapter 1, and just I think also the gender chapter, we had some feminist perspectives that we went over. Class, we had some conflict perspectives that were, right, this is the way things are, is the way it should be, versus there needs to be some kind of change because there is a male-dominated patriarchal society that is creating these inequalities that further hurts women. And that's basically what this is saying. So I suggest if you didn't, because this is kind of the last part of the chapter that I assume a lot of you guys get lazy and stop wanting to read. Like, I assume this is the part of the video you're like, I want to turn this B off. But this is very important, and this is like the gist of what I want you to understand. So please, pages 466 through 470, please read this and understand this and soak it in and understand it within the fabric of your being, of these arguments about how, I'm not saying that they're right. I'm saying I want you to see these point of views and relate them to your writing of male dominant society gets to the Catholic Church. I've been watching Surviving R. Kelly. There are so many things here that relate to that. It is crazy. Does anyone agree? Anybody see? If you've seen it, and this is like a question you want to answer, how does this relate to Surviving R. Kelly, right? Specifically the discussion about intersectionality, of how different things affect women differently. I taught a race class once. It was Race and Racisms, one of my favorite class, and to teach. And we spoke about intersectionality in depth, specifically the example of women's shelters and how women who are abused go to shelters, right? And then this was the study group that I think it was Crenshaw that she used to discuss intersectionality, about how shelters, the effect of shelters are different because different women have different results depending on what they're doing. So a white woman in a abuse shelter versus a black woman in an abuse shelter, they both might be in the same exact situation of being victims of abuse. However, the white woman will be more likely to be able to leave that shelter and go get a job somewhere, versus the black woman who might have a harder time. It's just the truth. The white woman might have a better support family system versus the black woman who will probably come statistic wise in comparison to the white woman, a family with looser family networks, right? This is just reflective of numbers that we've seen in the chapter, and this is reflective of the study of Crenshaw and intersectionality if anyone's interested in looking it up, right? So we have to look at, when we're looking at systems of abuse and the results that it has on family, and not group it all together. This is what I hate that a lot of you guys do in your writing, is like say overall generalizing things like women are never this or this and that, because there's so many ifs or buts, and intersectionality is one of those things that play into that, because even though women are one group, there's white women, there's black women, there's rich black women, there's poor black women, there's rich white lesbian white women, and then there's poor lesbian women, right? There's different groups of all these people. The difference, right? Who has it worse? A white, not worse, but who's going to be treated differently? A lesbian white woman versus a rich black woman. You know what I mean? So there's so many different categories, and the same thing with men. Black men, white poor man, black rich man, right? Think about that. So this is a part of the chapter that's very important to read again to the Catholic Church. And this is important because it discusses the institutional nature of sexual violence, identifying who's responsible, because it's not just one person, and the shame and stigma that victims go through. So although I said I wanted to discuss this part in depth, I feel like you guys may understand it from our discussion of consensus and conflict. And just reread these pages 466 to 470, because I feel like it'll help you understand a lot. And I would leave the notes for this just because I'm trying to cut this video short, and whatever. All right, so interventions. These are different interventions. I was planning on going through every single one with you, but I will leave the notes there for you to review. And what I want to ask you guys is, which ones do you think work? Which ones do you think is the best? Which two together? All them together? What do you guys think? Which one of these interventions listed on slide 28 do you think is the most positive? What do you think is the worst? I kind of want your opinion on the mandatory arrest rules. Do you think that we should mandatorily arrest both sides of a domestic dispute? What do you guys think? And then whether or not there's a less violent future. Oh, and then the workshop responsibility frames. I love this concept, and just I know this is something that you guys probably skip when you do your reading, but please take a minute to reread if you already read it. Oh my god, I'm trying to keep this short. What is it? The responsibility frame. Okay, on page 472, about the difference between personal responsibility and social responsibility. And I feel like it relates a lot to this whole COVID thing, is that there are a lot of things that happen, and we have to take there's a personal responsibility framework and a social responsibility framework, right? And that relates a lot to the Gabriel Fernandez case. Abuse. How much, and this is my final question to you guys in relation to this responsibility frame. With abuse in families, how much of it is the responsibility of society and how much of it's the responsibility of the individuals in the family? Is it both? There's a very important question that is on page 466, and Cohen says, does the state provide protections to women and children that alleviate the problem, or does the state intervention through policing, etc., impose on families and weaken their roles? So what do you guys think about that? So my final question to you would be the page 466, this idea of personal responsibility and social responsibility. Please reread these parts of the chapter. And I want your opinion on that. Do you guys think that the state protections helps family, or do you think it weakens the family as a institution that's supposed to run on its own? On that note, I'm sorry if it was a little long, but it's the last lecture, so it's the last time you guys will be seeing me lecture a chapter. Next week, I will be giving you a final review and my little goodbye. And all right, bye guys.